Welcome to the 1,000 Nights and One Night. Now, when it was the 892nd night, she pursued. It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the young man continued. So I said to myself, Thou hast parted with thy soul, and thy wealth is lost. Then of the excess of my chagrin I betook myself to the Tigris, and wrapping my face in my gown, cast myself into the stream. The bystanders saw me and cried, For sure this is because of some great trouble that hath betided him. They cast themselves in after me, and bringing me ashore, questioned me of my case. I told them what misadventure had befallen me, and they condoled with me. Then an old man of them came to me and said, Thou hast lost thy money, but why goest about to lose thy life, and become of the people of the fire? Arise, come with me, that I may see to thy lodging. I went with him to my house, and he sat with me a while, till I waxed calmer, and became tranquil. I thanked him, and he went away. When he was gone, I was like to kill myself, but bethought me of the future and the fire. So I fared forth from my house, and fled to one of my friends, and told him what had befallen me. He wept for pity of me, and gave me 50 dinars, saying, Take my advice, and hide thee from Baghdad forthright, and let this provide thee till thy heart be diverted from the love of her, and thou forget her. Thy forebears were secretaries and scribes, and thy handwriting is fine, and thy breeding right good. Seek out then whom thou wilt of the attendants, and throw themselves on his bounty. Thus haply Allah shall reunite thee with thy slave girl. I hearkened to his words. And indeed my heart and mind was strengthened, and I was somewhat comforted, and resolved to betake myself to Wasit, where I had kinfolk. So I went down to the riverside, where I saw a ship moored, and the sailors embarking goods and goodly stuffs. I asked them to take me with them and carry me to Wasit, but they replied, We cannot take thee on such wise, for the ship belongeth to Hashimi. However, I tempted them with promise of passage money, and they said, We cannot embark thee on this fashion, but if it must be, doff those fine clothes of thine, and don sailor's gear, and sit with us as thou wert one of us. I went away, and buying somewhat of sailor's clothes, put them on, after which I bought me also somewhat of provisions for the voyage, and returned to the vessel, which was bound for Basra. Embarked with the crew, but ere long I saw my slave girl herself come on board, attended by 2 waiting women, whereupon what was on me of chagrin subsided, and I said to myself, Now shall I see her and hear her singing till we come to Basra. Soon after up rode Hashimi with a party of people, and they embarked abroad on the ship, which dropped down the river with them. Presently Hashimi brought out food and ate with the damsel, whilst the rest ate amidship. Then said he to her, How long this abstinence from singing and permanence, and this wailing and weeping? Thou art not the first that hath been parted from a beloved. Wherefore I knew what she suffered for love of me. Then he hung a curtain before her along the gunwale, and calling those who ate apart, sat down with him without the curtain. And I inquired concerning them, and behold, they were his brethren. He set before them what they needed of wine and dessert, and they ceased not to press the damsel to sing, till she called for the lute, and tuning it, intoned these 2 couplets. The company left with my love by night, nor forbear to fare with me my heart's delight, and rage since their camels off-paced a fire, as of Gaza wood in the lover's sprite. Then weeping overpowered her, and she threw down the lute and ceased singing, whereat the folk were troubled, and I slipped down a swoon. They thought I was possessed, and one of them began reciting exorcisms in my ear. Nor did they cease to comfort her and beseech her to sing, till she tuned the lute again, and chaunted these couplets twain. I stood and bewailed who their loads had bound, and far yode, but still in my heart I found. I drew near the ruins and asked of them, and the camp was void, and lay waste the ground. Then she fell down in a fainting fit, and weeping arose amongst the folk, and I also cried out and fainted away. The sailors were startled by me, and one of Hashimi's pages said to them, How came you to take this madman on board? So they said one to the other, As soon as we come to the next village, we will set him ashore and rid us of him. When I heard this, I was sore troubled, but I heartened and hardened myself, saying, And though nothing will serve me to deliver myself from their hands, except I make shift to acquaint her with my presence in the ship, so she may prevent my being set ashore. Then we sailed. When we came hard by a hamlet, and the skipper said, Come, let us go ashore. Therewith they all landed, save myself. And as evening fell, I rose, and going behind the curtain, took the lute, and changed its accord mode by mode, and tuning it after a fashion of my own, that she had learnt of me, returned to my place in the ship, and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 898th night, she resumed, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the young man continued, I returned to my place in the ship, and presently the whole party came on board again, and the moon shone bright upon the river in height. Then said Hashimi to the damsel, Allah upon thee, trouble not our joyous lives. So she took the lute, and touching it with her hand, gave a sob that they thought her soul had fled her frame, and said, By Allah, my master and teacher is with us in the ship. Answered the Hashimi, By Allah, were this so, I would not forbid him on our conversation. Haply he would lighten thy burden, so we might enjoy thy singing. But his being on board is far from possible. However, she said, I cannot smite lute string, or sing sundry airs I was wont to sing whilst my lord is with us. Quoth the Hashimi, Let us ask the sailors. And quoth she, Do so. He questioned them, saying, Have you carried anyone with you? And they answered, No. Then I feared lest the inquiry should end there, so I laughed and said, Yes, I am her master, and taught her whenas I was her lord. Cried she, By Allah, that is my lord's voice. Thereupon the pages carried me to Hashimi, who knew me at first sight, and said to me, Out on thee! What plight is this in which I see thee, and what hath brought thee to such condition? I related to him all that had befallen me of my affair, weeping the while, and the damsel made loud wail from behind the curtain. The Hashimi wept with sore weeping, he and his brethren, for pity of me, and he said, By Allah, I have not drawn near this damsel, nor enjoyed her, nor have I even heard her sing till this day. I am a man to whom Allah hath been ample, and I came to Baghdad but to hear singing, and seek my allowances of the commander of the faithful. I accomplished both by needments, and being about to return home, said to myself, Let us hear somewhat of the singing of Baghdad. Wherefore I brought this damsel, knowing not that such was the case with you twain. And I take Allah to witness that when I reach Basra, I will free her and marry her to thee, and assign you what should suffice you and more, but on condition that whenever I have a mind to hear music, a curtain shall be hung for her, and she shall sing to me from behind it, and thou shalt be of the number of my brethren and boon companions. Hereat I rejoiced, and the Hashimi put his head within the curtain and said to her, Wilt that content thee? Whereupon she fell to blessing and thanking him. Then he called a servant and said to him, Take this young man, and do off his clothes, and robe him in costly raiment, and incense him, and bring him back to us. So the servant did with me as his master bade him, and brought me back to him, and served me with wine, even as the rest of the company. Then the damsel began singing after the goodliest fashion, and chanted these couplets. They blamed me for the causing my tears to well, when came a beloved to bid farewell. They ne'er tasted the bitters of parting, nor felt fire beneath my ribs that flames fierce and fell. None but baffled lover knows aught of love, whose heart is lost where he wont to dwell. The folk rejoiced in her song with exceeding joy, and my gladness redoubled, so that I took the lute from the damsel, and preluding after the most melodious fashion, sang these couplets. Ask, if needs thou ask the compassionate, and the generous donor of high estate, for asking the noble honours man, and asking the churry entails bane and bait. When abasement is not to be escaped by wight, meet it asking boons of the good and great. Of grandee to sue ne'er shall vilify man, but 'tis vile of mankind to wait. The company rejoiced in me with exceeding joy, and they ceased not from pleasure and delight, whilst anon I sang, and anon the damsel, till we came to one of the landing places, where the vessel moored, and all of the board disembarked, and I with them. Now I was drunken with wine, and squatted on my hams to make water, but drowsiness overcame me, and I slept, and the passengers returned to the ship, which ran downstream, without any missing me, for that they also were drunken, and continued their voyage till I reached Basra. As for me, I awoke not till the heat of the sun aroused me, when I rose and looked about me, but saw no one. Now I had given my spending money to the damsel, and naught left. I had also forgotten to ask the Hashimi his name, and where his house was at Basra, and his titles. Thus I was confounded, and my joy at meeting the damsel had been but a dream. And I abode in perplexity till there came up a great vessel, and I embarked, and she carried me to Basra. Now I knew none there, much less the Hashimi's house, so I accosted a grocer, and taking him an ink-case and paper, and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 899th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the Baghdad man who owned the maid entered Basra, he was perplexed for not knowing the Hashimi's house. So I accosted, said he, a grocer, and taking of him ink-case and paper, sat down to write. He admired my handwriting, and seeing my dress stained and soiled, questioned me of my case, to which I replied that I was a stranger and poor. Quoth he, Wilt thou abide with me and order the accounts of my shop, and I will give thee thy food and clothing, and half a dirham a day for ordering the accompaniments of my shop? And quoth I, 'Tis well, and abode with him, and kept his accounts, and ordered his income and expenditure for a month, at the end of which he found his income increased, and his disbursements diminished. Wherefore he thanked me, and made my wage a dirham a day. When the year was out, he proposed to marry me to his daughter, and become his partner in the shop. I agreed to this, and went in to my wife, and applied me to the shop. But I was broken in heart and spirit, and grief was manifest upon me, and the grocer used to drink and invite me thereto, but I refrained from melancholy. I abode on this wise 2 years, till one day I sat in the shop, and behold, there passed by a parcel of people with meat and drink, and I asked the grocer what was the matter. Quoth he, This is the day of the pleasure-makers, when all musicians and dancers of the town go forth with the young men of fortune to the banks of the Ubala river, and eat and drink among the trees there. The spirit prompted me to solace myself with the sight of this thing, and I said in my mind, Haply among these people I more foregather with her I love. So I told the grocer that I had a mind to this, and he said, Up and go with them as thou please. He made me ready meat and drink, and I went till I came to the river Ubala, when, behold, the folk were going away. I also was about to follow, when I espied the raz of the bark wherein the Hashimi had been with the damsel, and he was going along the river. I cried out to him and his company, who knew me, and took me on board with them, and said to me, Art thou yet alive? And they embraced me, and questioned me of my case. I told them of my tale, and they said, Indeed, we thought that drunkenness had gotten the better of thee, and that thou hast fallen into the water, and wast drowned. Then I asked them of the damsel, and she answered, When she came to know of thy loss, she rent her raiment, burnt the lute, and fell to buffeting herself and lamenting. And when we returned with the Hashimi to Basra, we said to her, Leave this weeping and wailing. Quoth she, I will don black, and make me a tomb beside the house, and abide thereby, and repent from sinning and singing. We allowed her to do so, and on this wise she abideth to this day. Then they carried me to the Hashimi's house, where I saw the damsel as they had said. When she espied me, she cried out great cries. Methought she had died, and I embraced her with a long embrace. Then said the Hashimi to me, Take her. And I said, 'Tis well, but do thou free her, and according to thy promise, marry her to me. Accordingly he did this, and gave us costly goods, and store of raiment and furniture, and 500 dinars, saying, This is the amount of that which I propose to allow you every month, but on condition that thou be my cup companion, and that I hear the girl sing when I will. Furthermore, he assigned us private quarters, and bade transport thither of all our needs. So when I went to the house, I found it filled of furniture and stuffs, and carried the damsel thither. Then I betook me to the grocer, and told him all that had betided me, begging to hold me guiltless for divorcing his daughter, without offence on her part, and I paid her her dowry, and whilst behooved me. I abode with the Hashimi in this way 2 years, and became a man of great wealth, and was restored to the former estate of prosperity, wherein I had been at Baghdad, I and the damsel. And indeed, all of the bountiful put an end to our troubles, and loaded us with gifts of good fortune, and caused our patience to result in the attainment of our desire. Wherefore, to him be the praise of this world, and the next whereto we are returning. And among the tales men tell is that of King Jali'ad of the Hind and his Wazir Shima, followed by the history of King Weird Khan, son of King Jali'ad, with his women and wazirs. There was once, in days of yore, in ages and times long ago, before in the land of Hind, a mighty king, tall of presence, fair of favour, and goodly of parts, noble of nature, and generous, beneficent to the people, poor, and loving to his lieges, and all the people of his realm. His name was Jali'ad, and under his hand were 72 kings, and in his cities 350 Qazis. He had 70 wazirs, and over every 10 of them he set a premier. The chiefest of all his ministers was a man called Shimas, who was then 22 years old, a statesman of pleasant presence and noble nature, sweet of speech, ready in reply, shrewd in all manner of business, skilful withal, and sagacious for all his tender age, a man of good counsel and fine manners, versed in all arts and sciences, and accomplished. And the king loved him with exceeding love, and cherished him by reason of his proficiency in eloquence and rhetoric, and the art of government, and for that which Allah had given him of compassion and brooding care, and his lieges, for he was a king just in his kingship, and a protector of his people, constant in beneficence to great and small, giving them that which befitted them of good governance and bounty and protection and security, and a lightener of their loads and taxes and tithes. And indeed he was loving to them, each and every, high and low, entreating them with kindness and solicitude, and governing them in such goodly guise as none had done before. But with all this, Allah Almighty had not blessed him with a child, and this was grievous to him and to the people of his reign. It chanced one night, as Jali'ad laid in his bed, occupied with anxious thoughts of the issue of the affair of his kingdom, that sleep overcame him, and he dreamt that he poured water upon the roots of a tree. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 900th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the king saw himself in his vision pouring water upon the roots of a tree, about which were many other trees, and lo and behold, there came fire out of this tree, and burnt up every growth which encompassed it. Whereupon Jali'ad awoke affrighted and trembling, and calling one of his pages, and said, Go fetch the Wazir Shima in all haste. So he betook himself to Shimas, and said to him, The king calleth for thee forthright, because he hath awoke from his sleep in a fright, and hath sent me to bring thee to him in haste. When Shimas heard this, he arose without stay or delay, and going to the king, found him seated on his bed. He prostrated himself before him, wishing him permanence of glory and prosperity, and said, May Allah not cause thee grief, O king! What hath troubled thee this night, and what is the cause of thy seeking me thus in haste? The king bade him to be seated, and as soon as he sat down, began telling his tale, and said to him, I have dreamt this night a dream which terrified me, and 'twas that methought I poured water upon the roots of a tree, whereabout were many other trees. And as I was thus engaged, lo and behold, fire issued therefrom, and burnt up all the growths that were around me. Wherefore I was affrighted, and fear took me. Then I awoke and sent to bid thee to me, because of thy knowledge and skill in the interpretation of dreams, and that which I know of the vastness of thy wisdom, and the greatness of thine understanding. At this, Shimas the Wazir bowed his head groundwards a while, and presently raising it, smiled, so that the king said to him, What deemest thou, O Shimas? Tell me the truth of the matter, and hide not from me. Answered Shimas, O king, verily Allah Almighty granteth thee thy wish, and cooleth thine eyes. For the matter of this dream presage all good, to wit, that the Lord will bless thee with a son, who shall inherit the kingdom from thee after thy long life. But there is somewhat else I desire not to expound at this present, seeing that the time is not favorable for interpretation. The king rejoiced in these words with exceeding joy, and great was his contentment. His trouble departed from him. His mind was at rest, and he said, If the case be thus of the happy presage of my dream, do thou complete to me its exposition when the fitting time betideth, for that which it behoveth not to expound to me, Now it behoveth that thou expand to me when its time cometh, so my joy may be fulfilled, because I seek naught in this save the approof of Allah extolled and exalted be He. Now when the Wazir Shima saw that the king was urgent to have the rest of the exposition, he put him off with pretexts. But Jali'ad assembled all the astrologers and interpreters of dreams of this realm, and as soon as they were in their presence, related to them his vision, saying, I desire you to tell me the true interpretation of this. Whereupon one of them came forward and craved the king's permission to speak, which being granted, he said, Know, O king, that my Wazir Shimas is nowise unable to interpret this thy dream, but he shrank from troubling thy repose, wherefore he disclosed not unto thee the whole thereof. But an thou suffer me to speak, I will expose to thee that which he concealed from thee. The king replied, Speak without respect for persons, O interpreter, and be truthful in thy speech. The interpreter said, Know then, O king, that there will be born to thee a boy child, who shall inherit the kingship from thee after thy very long life. But he shall not order himself towards the lieges after thy fashion. Nay, he shall transgress thine ordinances, and oppress thy subjects, and there shall befall him what befell the mouse and the cat. And I seek refuge with Almighty Allah. The king asked, But what is the story of the cat and the mouse? And the interpreter answered, May Allah prolong the king's life. They tell the following tale of the mouse and the cat. A groomakin, that is to say, a cat, went out one night to a certain garden in search of what she might devour, but found nothing, and became weak for the excess of cold and rain that prevailed that night. So she sought for some device whereby to save herself as she prowled about in search of prey. She spied at the nest at the foot of trees, and drawing near unto it, sniffed thereat, and purred till she scented a mouse within, and went about, seeking to enter and seize the inmate. When the mouse smelt the cat, he turned his back to her, and scraped up the earth with his forehand to stop the nest door against her, whereupon she assumed a weakly voice, and said, Why dost thou thus, O my brother? I come to seek refuge with thee, hoping that thou wilt take pity on me, and harbour me in thy nest this night, for I am weak, because of the greatness of my age, and the loss of my strength, and can hardly move. I have ventured into thy garden tonight, and how many a time have I called upon death, that I might be at rest from this pain. Behold, here am I at thy door, prostrate for gold and rain, and I beseech thee, by Allah, take of thy charity my hand, and bring me in with thee, and give me shelter in the vestibule of thy nest. For I am a stranger, and wretched, and 'tis said, Whoso sheltereth a stranger and a wretched one in his home, his shelter shall be a paradise on the day of doom. And thou, O my brother, it behoveth thee to earn eternal reward by succouring me, and suffering me abide with thee this night, till the morning, when I will wend my way. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of this tale for today, till it be morrow.